Hello, everyone. My name is Brooklyn. I'm at the Houseguest space right now, running everything. Excited to have Kacey here tonight. Her show is up until next Friday, so if you haven't gotten a chance to come by and see the work, definitely want to. Kacey received her MFA in intermediate from the University of Texas at Arlington, and she received her BFA from Indiana University Southeast. I've known Kacey for a couple years, and it's been a pleasure getting to see her work change and develop over that time. And I'm really excited to hear her talk. So, Kacey?
Hey everyone, thank you for coming. So I started out my talk with like how I always, I think, introduce myself. And hold on, I did a test. Okay, if I just click. So this is like an overview of where I grew up. I grew up in the middle of a cornfield. And I think that has like made me who I am, like as a person and as an artist. And I think that growing up in a rural place has really affected me like emotionally and I don't know, like as an artist too. And I think that you have to be like pretty resilient because you're going through the seasons and like seeing them change all around you all the time with the crops and like animals, and it's a vast space, so you're seeing the land and the sky meet each other and the days passing all together. So this is my home. I always think it's funny to show this because it is a little bit different than a lot of other people's growing up. Here we are. Oh, okay, so this is a picture of me like in the road near my driveway. And then I like to talk about how my undergrad work kind of started out with the idea of home and the domestic space. And I think that my work like kind of centers around that idea always. And for me, that idea is always changing and becoming more abstract. And yeah, so this is another Polaroid that I've just started with like scanning. I take Polaroids and film photographs pretty often. I would say weekly now. It used to be every day, but things are changing as you become a working artist and a professor. This was my graduate studio, I would say like the middle of thesis. I think of these different places, like not just home, but like where I feel at home and where I feel comfortable. And this is one of my favorite pictures that I like include in things and include with my practice because it's my place to like test out ideas, and I just feel comfortable to think and make and be myself. So in undergrad, I was a printmaker and a graphic designer, and my work was about home, and I was thinking about like where I should go to grad school, and considering my work was about home, I wanted to like change my environment to see like how my work would change. So I moved to Texas. I didn't really know anyone there. My grandparents lived nearby, but I was really attracted to the printmaking program there, and I was really excited to make prints and become a better printmaker. But I didn't end up making like any prints at all, maybe one edition of prints that whole time. So not only did like I change because of like my physical presence was totally different, but my work changed as well in a way different way. So this is my thesis work from the end of my MFA. I just graduated in May, and I thought it was important to talk about it leading up to my work at Houseguest. So this was all of my works together. I think in my practice, a lot of it became more about like the heavy lifting in my work became about like the thinking behind it and my thought process, and less about like physical making, which printmaking, as a lot of people know, is a lot of like physicality and stuff like that. Also, I think that, yeah, so this work was called A Long Goodbye, as was my whole thesis writing. It is very like derivative of like growing up in the cornfield, obviously. This was actually like one of the first pieces I started when I moved to Arlington. The original like goal was to make 888 ears of corn, which was one for each mile in between like Texas and home. And yeah, it didn't really work out after like a lot of critiques and like a year of making corn. I think I made like over 150, but it was a really like tedious process. It was really messy. I was starting to like not be able to like keep these, and a lot of people, like my graduate committee, was like thinking about why I was doing it and why I was like holding on so tightly, which became like this whole thing that my entire thesis became about. But I decided to stop editioning them, and I really like enjoyed how they would get more fragile as they would sit, because concrete is meant to be like in large slabs. So there's a corn, they just like the kernels would pop off, they would break in half like anytime you move them. So they all look pretty different, which I really liked. And then it's laying on the carpet from my childhood bedroom. So there are like burns and red wine stains from like sneaking wine in my room. And so I got this because my parents like renovated their home, and I just asked for this. They thought I was crazy, but I just decided to keep it because it felt like a map. It felt like the like overview of like seeing my home like in the plot of land. And then it sits off the ground, so it's like physically displaced, which was like a feeling that I felt most of my time in Texas. The concrete was about like moving to a very urban place, and everything was concrete, and the front yard of like my apartment was rocks, which I like I feel like I dwelled on like every day. But yeah, so this piece was called A Long Goodbye. It dwindles down to just one kernel of concrete corn. This piece was, I felt like it was like my big stance at my like graduate committee. They were always like harping about like letting go, and I always was like fighting back, like I am letting go, like in my own way. So this was called Now Forever, and this was my childhood blanket. You can see it has like holes and just like a lot of time, and I don't know, it was on its last leg. I was starting to like wake up with like parts of it in my hair. So it just felt like something I could like let go of, but like still keep forever, which I think is like just something I think about often, is like the balance of like letting go, but still like holding on to the parts I want to keep. So I casted it in a block of concrete, and then I built this pillar out of wood that's like perfectly as tall as the blanket. This piece is called Inelegantly Without My Consent Time Passed, which is a quote. but I call it love letters. And these are a lot of like things I've collected. I think that collecting is a part of like my remembering. So I have like ones of like all the receipts from, or in one of the frames, I have like all the receipts sent from like, or from sending letters and sending packages back and forth from my family. I have notes from my grandma. I have my best friend's hair. I collect other people's grocery lists, and they became like a lot different looking like when I moved to Texas. So these were all the ones I had collected from my time there. I had all my banana stickers from quarantine. So like a year of banana stickers. So I was playing on this idea of like framing things and then leaving things unframed, and really like reminiscing on like how I would hang things like in my childhood bedroom, and thinking about how frames like would keep these things that I collected only in this time. Still, like I couldn't take away from it and I couldn't add to it. And then like pairing it with these like nice photographs of things that people would normally frame. So like thinking about a few things like what is important to me. And then like the act of collecting isn't more about like what you've collected or like the act of collecting in general. And then just like having these things as like little time capsules that I couldn't add to or take away from. So this is my house guest work now. This show is called Gathered Lack. So actually I missed a piece. Here we go. I don't know which arrows to use and I'm so sorry. This is called This Place Is a Feeling. So this was the last piece I made in grad school. It was definitely about feeling in between and like starting to become sad because I knew that I would be moving back to Kentucky probably, and just feeling like no matter what now, I'm going to like be missing out on time with like people I really cared about no matter where I was. And it was kind of about like staying strong, like in this stance of like being okay with like longing and like pining for things. But yeah, so it has like part of my childhood carpet, it has concrete, and then this like ready-made gate in my hair. Yeah. Okay, so now we're at the house guest work. This one is called I Want Both. So I'm still thinking about like the in-between and thinking about like how my life is like a lot different and how parts of it are like collecting dust in my mind. So a lot of these, well, almost everything is covered in dust in this entire show. So I'm still thinking about collecting. I think that is a big part of who I am as like an artist and a person. So I have like a photograph I've taken of this hill like at a lake that I really liked going to in Texas, and also like parts of envelopes that I had saved from a while back. So like keeping these things together like behind a frame, also like this idea of tape and thinking about how I tape things up like in my bedroom, but also like thinking about tape and it's like really obvious way, like keeping things together. So like holding on still. And then going back to thinking about like these domestic objects, like these shelves that normally you would find ready-made, but like building them myself and letting my hands be like obvious. I think that that's something that's really important to me, as well as like keeping my hands busy and not like needing things to be perfect. I think that's something that like I allowed myself like at the end of grad school to really start exploring with, um, because I come from like being a printmaker and a graphic designer where things are like supposed to be perfect, like very well crafted. Everything has its place like in its box. And I think that that still influences like how I make, but letting myself and my hands be more like obvious in the work. So this is on the other side of the windows in Houseguest, and this is called Why Can't I Have Both? So obviously the same ideas. This is a photograph of the river in Kentucky. And then I don't know, I got really into like making shrinky dinks, and like I have this idea that I'll make like fine art shrinky dinks, like a full show one day. So I just wanted to add it, and I like the process of like going from photos to drawings back to photos. A lot of times I will like take a film photo and then photograph it with like my digital camera, and then reprint it out and like use that. So like there's this like long process still that makes sense to me, but yeah, I feel like the shrinky dink fits into this way I like to use like my photographs from like my everyday. This one is called Always Leaving Before I've Left. This is of my room right now. We're kind of sitting like on the same wall. So I think this is kind of about like a struggle with like living in the moment a little bit. I always feel like I have to be prepared for the change that's like inevitable. I think that comes back to like living in a rural area and like living in the land and being able to see like a thunderstorm come like for like an hour before it gets to you. So like I think this is a little bit about that, this idea of like the dust only being in parts are like really about like what I focus on or like dwell or obsess about. So like this one and the next one, which is titled, Do You Like When I Look at You? This was my apartment in Texas, and I think after living like in the same place like my whole life and then moving somewhere else, like it's obviously going to change you and as a person. And I think of myself like as these windows and like as this place where like I really learned to like myself and like just like my solitude and not feel so like lonely. And I would think about like the light changing. I have like several pictures of these like same windows and thinking about like the weather and like the land around it and how it was a lot different, but it like staying the same, but like being different at the same time. So these were made, these like last two, I was able to like print the photos and mask them off, and then I used flocking dust, and then I started just like sweeping stuff off my studio floor. And it has like several layers of this like dust from my floor on top of it. And these are like really delicate things, and I like that about them. And they're pretty gross, and I like that about them too. So these are some of my favorite pieces in the show. Yes, here's another detail. This one is called Gone for Now for Good. I think about this piece, and I think about like my apartment in Texas and how like I was very lonely, but I just started to like accept my solitude and accept who I was. And I also like am a pretty unclean person, I think. Maybe not unclean, but like I didn't dust a lot. So I think that the whole idea from dust like came from this. And as I was like leaving Texas and like cleaning up this apartment, like my blinds were crazy. And I thought about like the windows from the inside and how like my old self was maybe like collected on these blinds. So yeah, I think the photograph behind it is of my childhood bedroom window. You can see like the crops of corn behind it, behind like the window in the curtain. But it's about like living in Texas, and then the blinds are like measured to be like the same as my studio window. So it is about like place still, and how all these places like make who I am as a person and a maker. The title, I think, like reflects how like change affects me, and how, I don't know, like I just feel very affected by like even the smallest bit of change, and how like even if something isn't like gone forever, it does feel like it's like gone for good. So I think that, I don't know, it's important to be like honest in my titles, I think. So here's a detail. You can see the dust and flocking on the clay. Yeah, so this is what it looks like in space, with the last piece I'm going to talk about called A Friend for the Unsent. This guy is like an ode to my friend in Texas who, well, I spent a lot of time like thinking and reading and staring like in my room, and I thought about my ceiling fan quite a bit, because I would just stare and think and miss people, but not really like reach out, or I don't know, not like talk to them. So I think that that is where the blue comes from, which I've had like questions about. It is supposed to be like reminiscent of like sending like iPhone message, but I've also been like really interested in the color blue for a while. So I just went with it. It also has the gray dust on top of it as well. This is made from like actual remnants of a fan that I took apart, and then also the clay or magic sculpt, and then flocking on top of it. There's something in the chat I should read in a moment, I think. Okay, sorry. And then this is just laying on like a pillow from my bed. I brought it from my bed like that morning to install. So like giving this friend place to like lay its head. So I really like that it leans and has like the weight of a head on a pillow. I think, yeah. I really like the way it looks in Houseguest with the shadows. That was something I like didn't expect. But yeah. And then I have like some more pictures of what it looks like in Houseguest. Yeah, I think that is all, if there are questions.
I know there is one in the chat already.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I'm gonna read out loud, which feels awkward, but I have to do it. Your work really interests me. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Can you speak more on the importance of concrete as a material in your work? I understand the link to fragility in the urban environment in Texas, but you also speaking a lot to preservation. Have you ever used more permanent material to cast? No, I just learned about casting like in grad school. I think that concrete was really just that obvious like sense of like seeing like going from like a field to like a really urban area. I didn't know that it would become fragile, and I think that that is something that like changed how I felt about the piece, and then it also reflected how I like felt as a person. So I think that I kept with concrete like after the corn because it felt familiar, and I like knew the properties of how it worked. So I moved on to that with the blanket. But I like this idea of, yeah, preservation. I think that's where it went like with the blanket. Yeah, I haven't used any other material to like cast things in. Yeah, cool question. You mentioned, oh,
There you go ahead.
okay. You mentioned when talking about the dust photos, about living in the moment. This is interesting. What steps are you taking to achieve this, and how can you incorporate it in your art? Well, I don't know. I think that that's something I'm still working on. I think that I don't know about that one. You talked about with the concrete corn, you started with an intention to make 800 plus corn. And then since you abandoned that thought of the number, do you think that's a big part of your practice, being able to rope with the punches? I do think so. I think that a lot of these pieces have turned out to be a lot different than I had hoped. Maybe not the pieces in Houseguest. I think that I was learning new material, and I had to like learn how they worked. And then once I figured it out and like did test runs, I just went with it and allowed myself to like make things how I wanted them to look.
Do you feel like the imagery and objects and stuff that you use to reflect like growing up rurally in Indiana connected with the people that you were with in Texas, like in a lot of, I don't like, yeah.
Yeah, I like that question a lot. Yeah, I think that they totally did. Like people came up to me like at my like thesis work, and they're like, oh my gosh, I have a blanket like this, or like I didn't grow up in a cornfield, but like this reminds me of this. And I think that that's like the whole reason I like wanted to make art. I think that that's something that I really wanted to like keep doing after undergrad. Like in undergrad, my thesis show was about like living room furniture and stuff like that. And people would talk to me about like their living room furniture and like special chairs like in their lives. So I think that like once that happened, I was like, this is how I want to do everything. So I think that like domestic objects are a great way for me to like talk about how I feel, but it's also like a collective memory of like just shared objects together. So yeah, I think they do connect with other people.
Do you feel like living in a more urban or city type of environment has impacted you as much as living in a rural environment?
No, I think that um no, I think that living in a rural place like is something that I'll always like feel connected to. Um, but then like living in that place, so it's just like a lot different like on the surface, I think. And yeah.
Hey, Casey.
Hey sis.
Really strong show. I'm so excited about this new work. I had some questions about your process and how you start some of these pieces. I'm sure that there's a give and take here, but I'm just curious, do you feel like some of these pieces that incorporate the image, the photographs and the other materials or objects, do you feel like it starts with the image and then you decide like, I want to build a set of lines onto that? Or do you think about material you'd like to use, an object you would like to make, or a found object, and then like think about the photograph or image that's incorporated after? Or is it a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both. I like journal a lot and I draw like a lot of like quick drawings around me. So I think the fan like came from that and the blinds came from that as well. Also like my experience like of moving and seeing the dust, I just felt really connected to it. I think I do have like all of these photographs that I like have taken in the past like couple years, and um I think I like really push myself to incorporate them and not just let them like sit. And I think that the objects came first with this and then incorporating the photographs after. But I don't think that I'm like married to that. I think that it'll always be different and depend on what I'm making. Material wise, this felt like a little bit different too. In grad school, I was really into like this thought process of like the material has to tell most of the story. It has to do like the heavy lifting, like it has to be concrete because of this, and it has to be my childhood blanket because of like it all fitting together in this way. And then like right after grad school, you like have this like drop off of like constant feedback and like stuff like that. So there were materials I wanted to work with. I wanted to learn how to flock, and I wanted to learn how to use Magic Sculpt and like use my hands based off these drawings that I really liked. So I think that that's like where that came from, like for this.
That's awesome. I think that you have a really strong sense of narrative through object and photograph. And so it's kind of cool to hear that you have all of these different things in your toolbox and you're kind of like picking and choosing like what goes together, like the corn with your childhood rug or the things that you made with that that blanket. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there something in the chat? What artists were you thinking about when making your most recent work, and what is something you're reading right now that influences your practice? So I've really been into Katie Stout, who is a ceramicist. She makes like wonky like stools. I've been looking at a lot of ceramicists. I've always had this like love for ceramics, even though I've never like really spent a lot of time there. But yeah, also like I've been getting back into like photography, and I've been thinking about Wolfgang Tillmans again, which I was, but now he's like back into someone I look at quite a bit, and Michael Northrup. I've been really interested in photo books. I think it's because I have been teaching photography and digital art now that I've graduated. So like getting these materials together and thinking like, oh yeah, I like really liked this art. I really want to make a photo book now. So I think those are artists that I've been thinking about. Reading wise, I haven't been like reading to influence my practice as much as I did in grad school. Um, I've been thinking about things that I have read in grad school. I've been thinking about Roland Barthes, who wrote Camera Lucidia, and I was reading about this like crazy word that he made up about this idea of like living together and how like monks live together. Um, and right now I'm reading Maggie Nelson, The Argonauts, which in grad school I read her book Bluets, and that really has stuck with me. If you haven't read that, it's all about the color blue and it's really beautiful. But yeah, that's what I've been reading and looking
Hey,
at. Bluets
hey,
by Maggie
Kacey.
Nelson.
I was actually going to ask you if you had read Bluets before. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I was totally thinking about that while I was looking at the fan piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading it right now. I haven't finished, but it's
so good. It's so good. I feel like I do go back to it. I was like preparing for this and I was looking at my journal from grad school and it was just like quotes from Bluets and it was just like getting a little foggy in the eyes. So
yeah. Oh
I'm
my
glad
gosh,
you're reading
totally.
it.
I know. Yeah, it's so, I don't know. I've gotten into poetry quite a bit in my grad school experience personally.
Yeah. I
I
want to know
wanted
what
to
you're reading, like other than
Oh,
Bluets.
oh, we'll talk about it at some point. I'm
Okay.
reading, yeah, yeah, we'll talk about it. I had a comment or I don't know if this is really a question. I think it is a question. But when I look at your work, especially the objects, but I also think the photographs that you have sort of masked with dust, I think about them as objects as well, because you're sort of like treating them with layering techniques and sort of like making editorial choices afterwards. But when I'm looking at like the blinds and the fan and sort of like that frame, like mantle shelf piece that are made out of the magic sculpt and stuff like that, I guess the things that are made with your hands, they feel to me like very, like I do a lot of personification of them in my mind when I look at them. Like I feel very empathetic towards them as like little like animate things that are kind of like, I don't know, like askew and dusty and like left alone and sort of like, I don't know, I just sort of like put all these emotional charges on top of them as objects. And so like I'm hearing you talk about them as sort of like snapshots of memory, like I'm assuming like being inside of a room, obviously, and like looking up at ceiling fan or looking out of a window or whatever, like into another room. And that's so interesting to me too. But I guess I wonder if you think about them as like representations of emotional states or something like that. I'm sorry, this is like a very long and rambling question.
No,
but
I really no, I think that I totally do. I think that like all of my work is like when I go back and look at it, I do see it as like these emotional states or like feelings. I was like reading my journal and from like the end of grad school, and I just kept writing that like I wanted to remember things, I wanted to keep my hands busy, and I wanted to move through feelings instead of always like dwelling on them. And I think that like towards the end of grad school, I like really grasped that like with my work, I feel like a totally different person. And I think that those are like that emotional state, like, and I think because I do like move on so quickly from these things that like I feel like sometimes I don't like connect with them or like as well as I was like when I was making them. I don't know if that like was a confusing answer, but
no, totally. I appreciate just like hearing a little bit about the thought process. Thank you.
Of course.
Hi, Kacey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make a statement about something that you said earlier. I really liked you bringing up how when you lived in a more rural area, you could see the thunderstorm like an hour out, and you had all this time to kind of like prepare. Whereas like living in a more urban location, it felt like your levelness of or your level of like preparedness decreased because you couldn't predict or like foresee metaphorically and figuratively. And also probably why you checked the weather like 400 times a day. Um, but this not being about like weather, but almost like all things that deal with being in unfamiliar territory. And I just thought that was like really interesting.
Thanks, Stephanie.
And I love you.
Love you too. Alex had a question. You mentioned the importance of place in your work. What was the place you were thinking about in the newest work, or was it the in-between of Texas and Kentucky? I think honestly it was the in-between, and it is like this whole like abstract feeling that like comes with it. I think that's why I like allowed my hand to be so like obvious in these pieces, because like I don't know like where I'll be like for however long, and like moving in to a new place, like it all just feels like really new. My life feels very different, and I think like this work represents like that, and like I think that I like showed that with like letting my hand be like very present compared to my older work. Yeah.
You said something about like moving through feelings and everything. Do you feel like making this type of work, I don't know, it's hard for like a feeling to like forever go away, or like to actually, I don't know, to work through anything at all completely, I feel like, but
Yeah.
are you getting like catharsis from this?
Yeah, I mean, like making anything, I feel like feels like the best thing for me to be doing. Like I said, like keeping my hands busy is like my way of like working through anything. So yeah, I think so. I think there's another question. Do you think about seasonality at all at the very beginning of the talk? You mentioned being more aware of the seasons. I was thinking about the change of the seasons and the experience of harvest and these sorts of tropes of living in rural space. And I was wondering if you think about those things when you were. Definitely. I think, especially after like moving to Texas, where it's like always either hot or like warm compared to like living here. And then also, yeah, like the harvest and like how like everyone prepares for it. And then there's this like huge like collective change that everyone just like goes through, and like that's the end of it, and then it happens again, and that's the end of it. And I think that that's kind of how life goes. I think I did think a lot about like growing up like in this cornfield, and how the multiple or like the repetition and like rows going into like the repetition of like cycles of life. So yeah, that's something I think about as an artist and a person like quite a bit. Are there any other questions? Don't know.
Since no one else is saying anything, yeah, I mean, I was thinking about like the collection of dust, and you know, you sort of actively maintaining and utilizing that as a material. And I was thinking about like how that was just seemed so metaphorical for you know, the activity of just living on a farm, right? Just like monitoring something and then collecting it for use, and then kind of like letting it go. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Do you feel like with these pieces you had a ton of trial and error?
Oh yeah, totally. The magic sculpt is something totally new. Like I've never really worked with clay other than like intro to ceramics. This is like a 2-part clay that turns into resin and does become hard, but the things are like still very fragile. I'm like pretty nervous about like moving the fan at all. And then like some of the blinds broke as I was like installing them at Houseguest. So like I think that like learning about it and learning like its limits, there was a lot of like trial and error. There was trial and error with like the photographs that are flocked as well. Like learning how to like make the flocking layer and stuff like that. So yeah, a lot of trial and error, a lot of like accepting, which like I started to like journal quite a bit about like recently, just like how accepting is like pretty significant part of growing up. So I think that, yeah, the work reflects those things and the trial and errors.
Do you think that you could go back to where it is just the blinds, the photo?
Yeah, let's go. Maybe. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Do you want to talk about the image that's behind it?
It's just like a Polaroid from my childhood bedroom. It wasn't even a Polaroid like of when I lived there. It was pretty recent, which my grandparents like live in this room now. And I don't know, it didn't feel like a significant day, but this is a Polaroid that like I would just keep in my journal with me, and then I printed it at like the size of my studio window. So like I think that like sometimes I like sneak in like numbers or like importance of like size or how many things there are like in my piece. Like I kind of started that with like the corn, but it doesn't have to be like the main narrative for me. It's just like a kind of thing I do for myself. Yeah, it's a photograph that like I just thought is like beautiful. It's really nostalgic to me. I love that you can see the corn. I can like look at this picture and know like what it smells like in that room, or like how warm it is. So I think that photographs like can do that for me.
It's a really well balanced piece of art.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Have you read Sally Mann's memoir?
No, that's
my-
actually something that gets like suggested to me quite a bit, but I haven't yet.
It's a real thick read, but I think I read it in like 3 days. It's so good. And just I think one of the coolest things about living or growing up in a rural area is like obviously it's a very isolated thing for you, but I feel like so many people share the same romanticism that like came from that. And so that's like one of the really enjoyable things about her book is just like how much she's in love with growing up and living on a farm, and then also growing up in the South and everything. But yeah, I think that you would like it a lot.
Thank you. I'll totally look into it.
Ties in a lot thematically.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone for coming and your questions and thoughts.
Thank you for speaking, Kacey.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. This was absolutely wonderful and
Oh,
a privilege. Yeah.
yeah.
Like I said, if y'all haven't gotten to see Kacey's work, you should definitely come by. You can always message me or the Houseguest Instagram to set up an appointment.
Proud of you.
And also see Kacey's other show that is up in the bar gallery at IUS right now
Oh,
with
yeah.
Catherine Combs.
Yeah.
Also not one to miss.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, everybody, thank you all for coming. I hope you all have a great night. Thank you, Kacey, again. Thank you, Megan.
Of course. I thank you all. Yeah. I just
thank you, party.
all right, everybody. I guess we'll call it an evening, and thank you again for joining us, and have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too.
See you all.
Bye, Sid. Love you.
Bye, Sid.
Cool.